Good morning. Thank you all for coming and for waiting while we set up the table. As you know, this is the NSF DIMACS Workshop for Aspiring PIs in Secure and Trustworthy Cyberspace. I'm Rebecca Wright, and I'm a professor at Rutgers University and also the director of the DIMACS Center. Some of you were asking me over breakfast a bit about the DIMACS Center. I'm not going to take some of our precious time today, since we're quite packed as it is, to tell you more about DIMACS, but I encourage you to learn more. You'll all be getting on some email lists from DIMACS about security-related events that we run, unless you tell us to take you off. So you'll hear more that way, but we do a lot of other stuff as well. So I do encourage you to get more involved. We have a program today for you that's on the website. I didn't do printed copies, but we do have wireless internet, so you should be able to access that throughout the day. And you know, what the purpose, the reason NSF was interested in running this workshop, and the reason I think you all came out to participate is to just to help you as aspiring PIs who would like to be part of the SaTC program at NSF, to learn more about the program and to learn some strategies and tips and information to help you write successful proposals for your projects. And I'm really mostly just welcoming you, and we'll move into the NSF speakers very soon. But I do want to say, so I ran one of these 2 years ago as well, and part of the day then and now is some talks by current SaTC PIs, so that you can hear what they're doing and get some of their experience and expertise as well. And I changed it this year to calling it current SaTC PIs, because 2 years ago I called it successful SaTC PIs, and when I invited some of them to speak, every single one of them said, "What, me? I'm not successful." And and I think that is something worth keeping in mind, that even the people who have SaTC funding and who are successful researchers, they have failed proposals as well. They have proposals declined. They have papers rejected, and all of you, I think, are already successes. You're all in the jobs that you're in because you've been successful along the way, and this is really just some of you are very junior, working in very much in the sort of secure and trustworthy cyberspace already, and you're sort of at that point in your careers and moving on. Some of you are much more senior. Maybe you're coming from a different area that you've been working on, but finding yourself more and more interested in the security aspects and understanding how your work relates to that. And so, this is for you to learn more about the program. So we'll have a lot going on during the day. I'm going to talk just a little bit about logistics. One of the most logistically challenging parts of our day are the one-on-one meetings, which I know are very important to all of you. They're 10-minute slots. That really means they're about 9-minute meetings. Many of them are going to be just held out here, since we see that we have extra space. Some of them are going to be in these rooms 560 and 660 that are far away but more quiet. And I'm going to point you to both Carl Anderson from NSF in the black polo shirt back there, and our 2 student volunteers in the green shirts, Jason and Zhang Lin. They are who you should find a few minutes before your one-on-one to tell you where it will be held. And you do want to find them a good maybe 5 or so minutes before, because minutes that are lost finding your one-on-one after it was supposed to have been started will have to come out of the one-on-one. And I thank both Carl and the students for helping us out in this regard, especially the students who are completely volunteers. So thank you to you guys. There's Wi-Fi. There's a couple of these information sheets around the room. And then the other logistically challenging thing that we do is the panels, and which is a mock panel, so you can sort of see from this end a little bit about the proposal review process. So we'll talk about that in some detail, but that is going to require some movement around. But that'll start as a full group in here. And I'll talk about that then. So that is all from me for now, and then we're going to move over to Jeremy Epstein and several other NSF program officers.
Before you step down from the stage, Rebecca, on behalf of all the NSF program officers, I want to give you a very small token of our appreciation. Many of you have seen these SaTC water bottles, but very few of you have seen autographed SaTC autographs. So thank you very much for all you've done organizing this for us. Okay, and now I'm wearing the wrong glasses and I can't see anything. Yeah. I have an extra pair. Another prescription. They're just different prescriptions. Of course, it also doesn't help that this is a Windows machine and I'm not used to Windows. Okay, can one of the AV guys come to pull the files up because I'm not sure where they are? So while that's happening, a couple things that people have already asked me about this morning that did not make it into my slides. First of all, Jeremy. Thank you. One of the things that did not make it into my slides is the SaTC announcements mailing list. For those of you who are not on the SaTC announcements mailing list, I have little cards that tell you how to get on it, and I would encourage you to join because whenever there's new funding opportunities, that's the fastest way to hear about it. They all get posted, obviously, on the NSF website, but most of you don't check the NSF website on a daily basis. And usually the same day a new funding opportunity comes out, I send out an announcement. So, and it's usually only about 10 a year, so you're not going to get spammed. I encourage you to join that. And also the other thing that you should know about, and it's not clear to me exactly how many spots we're going to have, but the PI meeting is January 5th through 7th in Arlington. If you're not currently a SaTC PI, and most of you obviously are not currently SaTC PIs, I don't know how much space there's going to be for non-PIs, but if you're interested, send me an email and I'll put you on a waiting list if there is room. Okay. So I guess we already covered that. So first let me introduce the SaTC team. Those in red are here today. So if you'd stand up, Saul, Chris, Carl in the back. Chris is over here, Saul is over here, Carl's in the back. Victor, where did Victor go? He ran away. Heng is right here in the front. And then the rest of the program officers, just so you know who you're looking for. Our newest program officer is Deborah Shands, and she starts in 2 weeks from the Aerospace Corporation. Okay, thanks. Okay, so this is Sunday morning. You have to have the Sunday morning comics, and this was last Sunday's comic, so that's not how I got my name, but I thought it was Sunday morning comics. Come on. Okay. So what are the SaTC goals and objectives? Many of you have seen this slide before. Our goals are very broad within the area of cybersecurity to protect cyber systems, including host machines, internet, cyber infrastructure from all the bad things that happen there. There are 5 NSF directorates. In NSF speak, a directorate, if you're not familiar with it, is the top level organization within NSF. 5 of the 8 or 9 directorates, something like that, I don't remember exactly, are part of the SaTC program. SISE is the largest, which is Computer Information Science and Engineering, but Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences, which Heng is representing, and Education and Human Resources, represented by Victor, are also part of the very important parts of the SaTC program, so make sure you're not overlooking those. Mathematical and physical sciences and engineering have smaller roles in the program. But the participation of all 5 directorates reflects the fact that cybersecurity is a multifaceted, multidisciplinary problem. Many people think of SaTC as one thing, the base solicitation. The old one was 13.578. The new one that just came out last week is 14-599 for those of you who are going and looking online. But SaTC has a whole bunch of other pieces too, and I'm going to talk about each of these briefly after I talk about the program overall, but I want to make sure you realize there are a bunch of different pieces. The NSF Intel partnership on cyber physical physical system security and privacy. I just came yesterday, we wrapped up a meeting in Washington, a 5-day meeting about that. There are these 4 Dear Colleague letters. We'll be talking about each of these in more depth. SaTC also participates in the career program for new faculty and the CRII program, which is a brand new program this year for people in their first 2 years after their first 2 years of an academic position. We won't be talking about career and CRII today because those are not SaTC specific programs, but SaTC does participate in those. So if you're interested in either of those, just be aware you can submit to SaTC through those. So let me talk about the base solicitation. There are 3 basic parts: trustworthy computing systems, social, behavioral, and economic sciences, which Heng will be talking about, and cybersecurity education, which Victor will be talking about. And each of us have specific areas that we're focused on. There's also transition to practice, which we'll get to in a second. So the SaTC base solicitation that came out last week, there are a few changes compared to the prior solicitation, which many of you applied to. We replaced the Frontier Awards, which are up to $10 million in 5 years, with large awards up to $3 million in 5 years, and we expect about 6 of those. We merged the STARS solicitation, which was previously a separate solicitation. STARS is about hardware security. That's now merged into the main SaTC solicitation. And these are the dates. If you were sweating bullets, as I know some of you were, because of the September deadlines that it said were going to be the deadlines for this year, don't worry. The first deadline is mediums, October 27th through November 10th. And for those of you who aren't aware, some programs have deadlines and others have windows. There's really no advantage to submitting early in the window or late in the window. We look at them all at the same time, but please don't submit outside the window. Technically, submitting too early can cause you to be rejected, but we don't really reject people for that, but it adds to the work because we're more likely to forget about it if it gets submitted too early, and we certainly don't accept them late, but if you submit too early, it's more likely to be lost. So please submit inside the window. I want to say briefly the sizes have not changed since last year. The main thing I want you to look at in this slide is the right-hand column, the number of proposals we funded. For those of you who are not familiar with NSF speak, a proposal is something submitted by an individual institution. A project is a collaboration of multiple institutions. So when I say there were 65 proposals and 52 projects funded under smalls, that means that there were, assuming no more than 2 collaborations, there were no more than 2 collaborators. There were 13 of those that were had 2 universities, and the remainder had 1 university. Anyway, you can see the numbers there of proposals and projects. We obviously don't have numbers for larges. Let's see, is there anything? Oh, and Chris will, in a minute, talk about transitions, and I do want to point out that you can have transitions associated with the smalls, mediums, and larges. Okay, an important thing in the SaTC solicitation is there's this awful looking table, but I really encourage you to look at it because there are combinations that are allowed and combinations that are not allowed, and there are different page limits and all sorts of other things. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but make sure that you fit into one of these, and if you aren't sure, you should check with a program officer. Because in particular, larges have longer page limits. TTPs, you get extra pages, but you can't have, there are different times when you either have to have collaboration plans or can't have them. Okay, so let me delve into a little bit more detail in the trustworthy computing systems perspective. This is the technical part of the program, the computer science research, and it covers all the things you would expect to see in the computer science side of cybersecurity. This includes theory, it includes experimental research, human-centric, theories, models, algorithms, any of this stuff. We're really, really broad. And one of the things I encourage you to do if you're wondering, does my idea fit, is go to the NSF website. We publish the abstracts for every award that we give in every NSF program, of course, not just SaTC, and look at those and see if you can find something that's in your general neighborhood. If you do, that tells you we are obviously willing to fund it. If you don't, that doesn't mean we're not willing to fund it. It may just mean we haven't gotten the right thing. But if you see something, then you know you're in the right area. And I'll tell you a trick. The easiest way to find all the SaTC awards is you go to nsf.gov/award search, click on advanced search, and then in the field that's called element code, or excuse me, program element code, fill in the number 8060. And the number 8060 tells it that you're only interested in SaTC, and then you don't get all the other stuff that you don't care about. Anyway, so very broad. Trustworthy Computing Systems is very broad, and I encourage you to look at other grants if you're trying to decide whether yours fits. The STARS perspective, as I said last year, was a separate solicitation. This year it's merged into the main solicitation. It's focused on design for assurance. It is jointly funded by NSF and the Semiconductor Research Corporation, and the awards are co-funded by NSF and SRC. The key thing you need to know if you're considering submitting to a STARS perspective, which have to be small proposals, is you have to have an authorization to share your proposal with SRC, because normally we can only share proposals with reviewers, but this gives authorization to share with SRC. That authorization can be as simple as a statement in the supplementary documents: I give permission for NSF to share my proposal with SRC. It doesn't have to be something drawn up by a lawyer if your university doesn't require it. And there was a webinar last year that had lots and lots of information if you're interested in hardware security. And so the next area, the next perspective is social, behavioral, and economic sciences. Just to avoid so many swaps back and forth between people, I'm going to tell you to wait for Heng to show up on the dais in just a couple minutes. Okay. All right, there we go. The next one is cybersecurity education, and again, you get to wait for too much fun with, okay. Okay, and transitions to practice. And now we will actually do a swap. If Chris, you want to come up and talk for a minute about transition to practice, and then I'll finish this.
Okay. So transition to practice. We want to see SaTC work have real impact. And to do this, we have this option where you can actually get additional support, additional funding to carry things beyond what would normally be considered the research stage. So,
Chris, you're going to be out of
okay, you want? Oh, we're on camera. That's right. So, what we want here is prototyping, deployment. Deployment not necessarily kind of real world starting a company, but it could be releasing things to the rest of the community to experiment with. In fact, there's a requirement that software developed under a transition to practice option be released as open source. That's part of the deal of getting the additional funding. Emphasis is really things that impact science and education environments. So it's not so much about commercialization per se, but getting something out there so that other researchers, the educational community, the other scientists can make use of this. There's also some other transition to practice options. This is not just something within NSF. So how do you get this? It's an option on the original proposal. You'll put TTP option : in the title somewhere and read the solicitation to figure out where. You get an up to 5-page supplementary document. This is not part of your regular program description. It's separate 5 pages where you talk about the transition to practice. So the idea is if your research is successful, here's 5 pages to talk about what you're going to do next to get it out there into the real world. The budget for that option should not be part of the regular budget. It should be described in that additional 5 pages, what you'll do with that additional 167,000 on up money, depending on which size it is. The review criteria for this, what's the impact on the deployed environment, whether it's an experimental or operational deployment? At the end of this, what's going to be the impact of having it out there? What's the value of that capability, potential impact across the broader NSF community, feasibility, utility, how's it going to work, and then a project plan, how you're going to go about doing this, goals, milestones, how you're going to evaluate it. Similar to what you do for a research proposal, but again, this is more of a transition to practice. And last, how will you really evaluate the effectiveness of the capabilities? What are the tangible metrics for this? One key thing to remember, the transition to practice option is independent. It's considered separately from your research proposal. It's reviewed by the same panel. They know what you're doing. It helps them to judge it. But as you'll see when we discuss the mock panel today, it's not considered in the ranking of the research proposal. So there's a ranking of the research proposal, and then there's a separate statement. If this research is funded and successful, what does the panel think of that transition to practice? Should it get that supplement if things go well? And so you really do keep this as it's viewed separately. So not having transition to practice isn't going to affect the way the research proposal is viewed, or a transition to practice option that people look out and say, yeah, it's interesting research, but I just don't see it happening, the transition to practice, when they say, you'll still be ranked well on the research, and they'll just say, well, maybe it's not something you should consider for transition to practice option, but the research looks good. So that's a key thing to remember there. Okay. Yes.
In terms of time, how is the TTP option considered? If you have a 3-year proposal, is it assumed that the TTP option is after that, or is it somehow running in parallel?
You know, I've been trying to find that in the solicitation. Do you know what the answer to that is?
The solicitation doesn't say the answer is any way you want. Some people do it in parallel. Some people do it as the 3rd year. Some people do it as a 4th year. Tell us in your 5-page plan what you plan to do. But there's no rules. We have people who started in the 1st year. They start transitioning the very first results they have.
Yeah, we have various ways of doing the budget for this, and so that's figured out after the fact. That's why your budget is just for the research, and if we say, yeah, we want to do this transition to practice, it could be added into that budget. It could be done as a supplement after the fact. Each option would be considered on a case-to-case basis, case-by-case basis.
What's
right for your proposal? What's right for the work?
That was a good question. I'm glad you raised it. Oh, and here's the trick I just told you about to figure out if your research fits. Let's see. People ask, well, what do you fund in SaTC? So this was a very unscientific summary of what we funded out of 128 new research projects in FY14. Basically what happened is I went through the list of all the proposals and I said, well, this is sort of here, this is sort of here, and I tried to group them. So don't treat this as too precise, but as a gut feel for what we're doing. This should give you an idea of the breadth of what we funded in FY14. FY13 and FY12 were similar.
So what is missing? You say it's a major area that is not on the list.
There's always new things cropping up. We're underrepresented in some of these areas, like forensics is an area where we have relatively little. I wouldn't off the top of my head be able to say what we're missing. Do you have a suggestion what we're missing, Victor? Okay. Okay, I do have this. We are underrepresented in moving target. If you're familiar with the federal strategy for, does anyone remember what the full title of that document is? some god-awful bureaucratic name. There's the Federal Strategy for Cybersecurity Research or something like that came out a few years ago. It identifies several different areas. The one, you can find it on the NITRD website, cybersecurity.nitrd.gov. You can find the full report. But the areas that were sort of underrepresented are moving target, tailored trustworthy spaces, science of security, social and behavioral sciences other than cyber economics were underrepresented, and as I mentioned, forensics. So we have things in all of these, but there are areas where we don't have as much as I'd like to see. And I encourage you, if you're interested in those, to read that federal strategy. Yeah.
Sorry, I asked you one quick question.
Wait for the microphone, please. We're recording this, so actually I guess we should have said, if you don't want to be recorded, don't ask a question.
All right, so one quick question. We say science of security. Is that like a research structure or how we should address it, or is it more theoretical work?
Science of security is something that tends to mean whatever people want it to mean, sort of like Allison.
That's what I was afraid of.
A lot of times it means anything. It means things that are quantifiable and reproducible. Cryptography is one of the things that's most measurable, and it tends to fit most in that area. But it's an area that there's a lot of debate about what it really means, and I'm not going to try to answer it, but suggest that you read what NSA says about it on their website, and also there was. Well, I mean, certainly read the federal strategy for what it says on the topic.
Jeremy?
Symposium, hot topics in science of security. That's happened a couple times.
That's true.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that there is a position paper about they identified 5 hard problems that are supposed to represent the area of science of security. So there is a position paper out there.
Okay, thank you. I didn't remember that. Okay, sure.
Would these slides be available to us and when?
All of the slides you see today are going to be posted on the DIMACS website once we give Rebecca the final versions. They kept changing around literally up until a few minutes before we started, which is why they're not already there. Okay. So I mentioned the NSF Intel Partnership on Cyber Physical System Security and Privacy, or CPS security. This is another solicitation separate from the base solicitation we've been talking about. It's 14571 if you want to look it up. The key things to know about this is there was an ideas lab that actually ended yesterday, and there that was an invitational event, but even if you did not go to the Ideas Lab, or even if you applied and were not invited, you can still submit a proposal, which are due October 28th. There are 2 sizes, synergies up to $3 million in 3 years, which are jointly funded by Intel and NSF, and breakthroughs up to $500,000 in 3 years, which are funded only by NSF. You can apply to either one of these regardless of attendance at the Ideas Lab. There was a webinar we did, and again, you'll be able to get this link from the slides, or you can find it on the NSF webpage, and you'll find out more about it. There were a lot of good questions on that webinar, so I encourage you to listen to it. And let's see, there's a total of $8 million in funding on this. The next thing is that I'm going to talk about briefly, and then Heng is going to talk about more when it's her turn, is the eGERS enabling new collaborations between computer and social scientists. This is a program that we've run for the past 2 years to encourage collaborations between computer scientists and social scientists. Note the underlined part, who have not previously worked together. We're trying to jumpstart new collaborations. It's a 2-phase process: submit white papers, and if invited, then you submit an eager proposal, which is up to 8 pages and up to $300,000. We funded 10 of these in FY13, 16 in FY14, and we have not made an announcement for FY15, but if you're on the SaTC announcements list, you'll know the moment that happens. So I know this is an eye chart and you can't read it. The main purpose that, for doing this is so that when you get access to the slides, you can look up all of these proposals and read the abstracts and get an idea of the sort of things that we're interested in. And this is the list of FY14s. I had hoped that I would be able to announce all of them, but some of them we've made all of our decisions, but they're waiting for the contracts people to sign the paperwork, and I'm not allowed to disclose them until the contracts people sign off, because only they can commit money. The program officers can't commit money. But anyway, so I've given you the numbers of the ones that haven't been released, and so when they become public, you'll be able to look them up and find out what they're about. So again, you'll see these on the slides when they're on the website. Heng is going to talk about this Dear Colleague letter. So, okay, we'll skip that. And another thing we did recently was cybersecurity education eagers to encourage computer scientists and educators to work together. And this is closed right now, but I'm telling you about it because it's possible we may do it again next year, and I sort of want you to have the idea of what things we're looking at. And this is also a two-phase process. And those of you who submitted white papers will be notifying you by September 1st of whether we're inviting you to submit a full proposal, and if so, you'll have till September 30th. So if you're not already in the queue, you can't get in now, but do watch to see if we do it again next year. And when Victor talks, he will talk both about this. Are you going to talk about this a little bit? Probably not about this. Okay. Okay, but Victor is going to talk about the education component of the base solicitation. This is a different thing. So there's two separate education, cybersecurity education related opportunities. Make sure you know that there are two of them. This is something that actually, you're the first time that this is being spoken about outside NSF. I just got permission this morning to talk about it. This is a new announcement that will be coming out this week. The details, you'll have to wait for the formal announcement, but basically we're trying to, see, do I have a slide about it? Oops, no, that's the wrong slide. Basically, we're providing additional funding in collaboration with the Israeli equivalent of NSF, so that if you want to collaborate with an Israeli computer scientist for cybersecurity research, we will provide additional funding. NSF will provide funding for Americans, and BSF will provide funding for Israelis. So watch the solicitation if you're interested in that. Finally, if you want to be a panelist, this is a question that comes up all the time. Why should you be a panelist? To learn how to write a good proposal and learn how the sausage is made and to serve the community with your expertise. Don't do it to make money because it doesn't pay very well. It certainly doesn't pay well given the expertise and time you put into it. If you're not, there are rules if you're not a U.S. citizen if you're not a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, then there are limits to how much we can pay your expenses. But Carl can answer those sorts of questions if you're in that category. The important thing is, if you're interested in being a panelist, send a list of topic areas to me, and then I will put you in our database, and then all of the program officers search the database when they're looking for panelists. Don't send me your CV. We use the database of keywords to help us find people, and then we look at CVs after that. And there are rules. If you submit a small, for example, you can't review for smalls, et cetera. And there is no guarantee you'll be selected, but we're always seeking qualified panelists. And now I think it's either, I think Heng goes next. Is that right? Okay, and I still can't find where you can do it? Okay.
That's a wonderful discussion, beginning of the discussion. So good morning to everyone, and I think Jeremy already did a wonderful high-level picture about what SaTC it is. And during my presentation, I'm concentrated on SBE-related business. So first, you might be wondering, what is SBE, right? So I will give you kind of a high-level picture, telling you what do we mean by SBE and the SBE perspective of SaTC program. And then I will focus on two Dear Colleague letters where Jeremy mentioned, and then then I give you 2 sample examples about our funded project about new collaboration eager, so that you can see, how the social and computer scientists form the new collaboration as kind of case study. And then lastly, I want to talk about the Dear Collect letter on privacy research. So this is the agenda today. So first, what is SBE? I think to help you better understand, I kind of have this my favorite chart about the organizational structure within the National Science Foundation. So you will see that under the Office of the Director, there are 7 boxes, 7 light yellow boxes. If you think about, the foundation as a university, those yellow boxes represents colleges or schools that based on the different kinds of disciplines. So I am from the Directory for Social Behavior and Economic Sciences, and Chris, Jeremy, and so are from the Computer and Information Science and Engineering, and Victor is from the EHR, which stands for Education and Human Resources. Within SBE, we do have different divisions which actually represents the different grouping of different social sciences. And under our front office, we have a virtual office, which is the SBE Office of Multidisciplinary Activities. And then we have the Division of Behavior and Cognitive Sciences, BCS, and then we have Division of Social and Economic Sciences. And on behalf of SMA, BCS, and SES, I represent SBE to manage the SBE-related SaTC activities. I think 2 days ago, I got some questions from some PIs who have very deep understanding about SBE structure within NSF, and one interesting question was, what's the boundary between BCS, SES, and SMA, which all contribute budget to the SaTC program? I mean, my answer was, there is no real walls between BCS, SES. I mean, I manage the SBE perspective on behalf of all these units within SBE. And if you feel BCS, the label of BCS or SES are too abstract, I give you some examples about, what do we mean by BCS within SBE. Within the BCS, we have standing programs such as cognitive neuroscience, social psychology, developmental and learning science, and perception, action, and cognition, and so on. So all these are standing programs within SBE, BCS, and for these programs, we do have solicitations calling for research twice every year. So we have a spring submission deadline in January, and then we have August submission deadline in August. So if you think your research fits with these areas, feel free to explore the website of BCS and look for appropriate programs you may be able to submit it to, in addition to SaTC program. And for SES, it's another division. SES funded a lot of programs such as economics, sociology, science, technology and society, science of organizations, and law and social science, and so on. So these kind of, by presenting this SB infrastructure, right, so you can have a better understanding of different types of social sciences within SBE. So let's kind of narrowing and say that, what is the SBE perspective of SaTC? Within SBE perspective of SaTC, we look for research projects that have the potential to enhance the trustworthiness and security of cyberspace and contribute to theory or methodological contribution of basic SBE sciences. And we look for the proposals which label as SBE primary proposals. As Jeremy mentioned, that for each proposal, when you submit it to SaTC, we ask the PIs to indicate your primary perspective, whether it's TWC, standing for Trustworthy Cyberspace, and then the SBE, Social Behavior and Economics. For SBE primary proposals, these proposals will be primarily reviewed by the SBE scientists. And for this, community, SBE reviewers often value about fundamental theoretical and or methodological advancement to the SBE sciences. And in the review criteria, SBE scientists often looking into the generability of your findings, looking to a lot of details such as, your application of survey methodology, whether you kind of provide details on the sampling approach, justifying the validity of your survey instrument, and justifying the potential generability of the research findings. So, which might be a little bit different from the computer science perspective, because the social scientist looking into these methodological details whenever you actually mention of applying social science methods or the social science theories in this particular proposal. And within TWC, I noticed that, at least for the past year experience, that within TWC, we do have a human factor type of panel, where that panel is used to evaluate research proposals that focus on evaluating usability of privacy and security approaches. And that community actually overlaps with academic field of human-computer interaction. For that particular type of proposals, sometimes it's under TWC perspective, because we do have a usability panel, and sometimes for certain type of human factor research, we also feel that the contribution may potentially, right, they are so significant that they may potentially contributing to social sciences, and we also co-paneled by SBE panel. So that's kind of a special area, and try to, serving as a bridge to linking the computer science perspective and the social science perspective together. Here I listed a sample of SBE SaTC topics, or those projects we've funded for the past 3 years. It's not a very comprehensive list, it's just a high-level summary of those keywords I scanned through for all the SBE SaTC projects. Some topics including the value of cybersecurity insurance, methods to nudge end users to improve their cybersecurity compliance, social technical solutions to reduce risk exposure of end users, and so on. Since all these slides will be available, I think you can enjoy reading later. Now I would like to give you 2 case studies about the SaTC new collaboration eagers, so that you may want to see, how those new collaboration may happen, between the social and computer scientists. I will skip this part because Jeremy gave you a very comprehensive high-level picture about what this program is. And here I have one particular example we funded early this year, and I assure that it's already announced, so it's public record. I didn't grab anything that is that's hidden from Jeremy's website. So this is a project that is designed to investigate consumer responses to security incidents and data breach notification. The 2 PIs, one is focused on the applied economics area, and the other is a computer scientist focused on machine learning and data mining. And this team get together because they had access to a large financial database through a large financial institution, through one of the major university research centers. And that large data set contained customer transaction data and all the details on security incidents, for example, whether they encounter certain security events or privacy breach events in the past 5 years, and what kind of privacy breach notification these customers got, and then what kind of follow-up actions they made based upon their receiving of the breach notification. So they contain all this richful data set that's shared through a very large financial institution. So these 2 scientists get together, would like to examine the degree of user behavior change due to the security incident or privacy breach incident. So I think one of the beautiful parts of this project is that they are going to, have implications about the policy making. For example, in this country, we do have the security breach notification laws, and to date, we haven't had the field data to show, how effective these notification laws are and what's the actual cost in terms of complying to security breach notification laws. So this is a 2-year project, fits with the exploratory nature of the new collaboration project. They asked about around 200K. And now you may ask the question, right? I keep mentioning, SBE is looking for either theoretical or methodological contributions. And then for this project, probably I haven't talked about any specific theory here yet, right? So the starting point is that they got a large data set, and then it seems that it's not the traditional or conventional type of social science methods where social scientists started with a stream of literature and then build on their hypothesis or propose their new kind of, plan to extend that stream of literature. So I admit that it's different approach. It's more kind of data mining approach. In the social science kind of terminology, we call it data fission approach, where you didn't have a theory, you have this large field data set, and then you try to explore and build economics modeling, and hopefully at the end of the day, based on the mining exercise, they can systematically form a theoretical framework that can, contribute back to the applied economics domain. So that is kind of methodology or the approach we actually appreciate from SBE perspective, especially for SaTC program, because we recognize that SaTC program is an interdisciplinary program. We are more kind of flexible and open compared to traditional SBE sciences. So this is another example. This is another team between a behavior researcher and a computer security experts from Polytech Institute of NYU. They get together to explore the spear phishing attacks to the end users. And in this particular project, they do start with a stream of literature, which is the big 5 personality traits from the well-established psychology literature. And then they try to examine the effect of the big 5 personality traits on users' responses to spear phishing attacks. And the beautiful part about this project is that with the collaboration of the computer security expert, they are going to build a system that enable their doing of a field experiment. What they are going to do is that they send simulated spear phishing messages to users on their actual email accounts across 4 different kinds of organizations, including 2 universities and 2 companies. So by doing that, we see that their advancement to the SBE sciences would be within most of the current security type of SBE type of projects. Most of the researchers actually concentrating collecting data on users, intentions or their self-reported behaviors. There is lack of research on observing, users' real behavior. So with the collaboration of computer scientists, they are going to do this field experiment in a realistic settings. So hopefully by the end of the day, upon finishing their project, they can make, the novel contribution on methodology by conducting this field experiment to the SBE sciences. So that's the new collaboration eager. So this is my last item for today's presentation, which is about the Dear Collect letter on research on privacy in today's network world. Before talking about the Dear Collect letter, I would like to present some kind of design rationale in terms of designing this letter, because when this letter was published in December, I received a lot of phone calls asking me, why you kind of published this DCL around this time of the year. And some other more interesting question would be, what's the relationship between this Dear Colleague letter and your own research on privacy? Is that, your job is kind of changing the scope of SBE SaTC research? So by using this platform, I would say, no, nothing is true. I happen to be a privacy scholar, and then this Dear Colleague letter has nothing to do with my own research. So that's the kind of clarification I would like to make it publicly. Otherwise, I keep receiving this question, are you changing the scope of SBE perspective? So before talking about this Dear Colleague letter, let's think about the label of privacy itself. What do we mean by privacy? I believe that we have social scientists here, we have econ scholars here, we have computer scientists here. And when we talk about privacy, what do you mean? And what kind of things you're kind of thinking in your mind? So here I listed several kind of popular definitions from different fields. From law perspective, privacy is defined as a right to be left alone. And from computer science perspectives, over the last decades, we see a lot of different kinds of definition has evolved and emerged in the literature, which includes the very popular key anonymity, L diversity, T closeness, MV invariance, differential privacy, and so on. So this is more kind of computer science perspective. And then if you're looking into the field of social psychology, marketing, human-computer interaction, and information systems, you will see a frequent linkage between the mentioning of the term of privacy and control. And in these fields, privacy has often been defined as individual control over the information flow. So what is privacy? Back to 70s literature from sociology, Margulies already made the kind of conclusion saying that around that time, it's about 40 years ago, privacy scholars do not agree on what privacy is or whether privacy is a behavior, attitude, process, goal, state, or what. So around that time, that was kind of messy literature picture emerged from 70s privacy literature. And then there is a committee formed in the year of the 2007. It's a National Academy of Science. They have several privacy experts sitting together and to review, what do we mean by privacy around that time from different kind of research literature. They made this interesting observation that the notion of privacy is actually messed with multiple meanings, interpretations, and value judgment. So what is privacy? It seems that I'm not very helpful here because I didn't provide an answer. And I want to present this kind of several examples of the rich definition of privacy from different fields. I think this rich picture actually justified our needs for privacy R&D activities, right? So that we can better integrate, different disciplines' perspective and to think about next generation of the privacy solutions and also think about reframing our privacy definition because of the trend of big data, social media, and so on. So if we're looking into the NSF current privacy research portfolio, we already funded a lot of different kinds of projects in terms of privacy R&D. For example, we have the research projects looking into formulation of privacy in terms of access control, formulation of privacy as a social psychological construct from SBE perspective, privacy policy, related topics, algorithm foundations, economics, usability aspect, and so on. So related to this topic, in August, last year in August and early this year in February, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy issued 2 requests for information on privacy research activities pursued by different kinds of government agencies. So as part of the responses to this RFI from the White House, NSF conducted a kind of internal analysis about all the privacy projects that has been funded by the foundation. And one of the interesting findings from this report, which is posted on the NITRD website, is that there is about $25 million per year for the past 5 years invested in privacy research-related activities. And in fact, when we look at the SaTC program in the last year, in the FY13, there is about 35% of SaTC money actually goes into the privacy-related project. And you may be wondering that, yeah, we do fund a lot of privacy-related, projects. But what are these, overarching picture of these privacy-related awards that has been funded in the past 5 years? So here are the kind of overarching picture from our internal analysis. From science-related projects, the general goal from all these awards is to ensure that the data can be shared and utilized, but does not reveal personal identifiable information. So a lot of projects touch about PII and PII protection. And interestingly, from SBE perspective, we would imagine that maybe SBE adopt a broader perspective of privacy because we talk about social, legal, and psychology, state type of privacy things back to the 70s literature. But interestingly, a number of privacy projects funded by SBE for the past 5 years, they are all similarly address the same issue. So social scientists are also trying to seek means to protect PII in their research for the past 5 years, which made us wonder, right, maybe we should broaden the SPE perspective or privacy research portfolio a little bit, broader. So that's the kind of design rationale for drafting this Dear Colleague letter on privacy research. So the purpose is try to encourage more social behavior and economics aspects of privacy research that is conducted in the context of different kinds of technological trends or different technological artifacts today. For example, big data, for example, social media. So, but I want to clarify that this DCL itself does not serve as a funding mechanism. Instead, it's information it's an information sharing mechanism that link to the different kinds of programs. So if you are doing privacy research, you can consider submitting your privacy research to SPIBIS program. It stands for Interdisciplinary Behavior and Social Science Programs. And also SaTC, as I mentioned that based on our data analysis, SaTC is one of the major programs that funds privacy research. And also in our data analysis, we also found several other privacy awards that have been funded by other standing SPE programs such as Science, Technology, and Society, Economics, and Sociology. So this slides visualize some of our example topics that we highlighted in the DCL. I encourage you to just Google privacy DCL NSF, and then you can find the full version of the description. That's it. So I welcome any question during today's meeting or in one-to-one meetings.
So my name is Victor Piotrowski, and I will talk about funding opportunities for cybersecurity education workforce development. Again, I will go pretty quick through the slides because they will be available to you so you can read more details later. But generally, what I would like to mention before I start is that one of the criteria for every program in NSF is integration. One of the criteria for evaluating a project is integration of research and education in general. But in SaTC as an example, when we essentially go an order of magnitude higher, we integrate and fund a lot of projects because we have a terrible shortage of cybersecurity workforce, or generally in computing, big data, cybersecurity. These are the areas when we have hundreds of people, supply smaller than demand. So the first thing I would like to show you is here is it's a lot of different data that shows you what is the shortage of cybersecurity professionals. But the one thing that I consider more reliable than others is that Frost and Sullivan report, and for Americas, it says that we have about 14% annual growth in cybersecurity profession. That is extremely high. The other is from Bureau of Labor Statistics here, looking at occupational data. And again, you have 2010, 11, and 12. And in 12 the area is divided into three more popular ones: information security analysts, web developers, and computer network architects. And then compared to 2022, it shows you the increase just in those three areas, right? So it's very dynamic growth. And here's another diagram showing generally computer and information system degrees. So not just cybersecurity, but in computing, we have a projected shortage. You see on the left bracket, you see the supply annual degrees earned. On the left, you see annual openings, so demand bracket. And the difference is, so between 143 to 103, about 40,000 annual openings more than supply. And finally,
we have also a shortage in big data. So that recently we have another competing area that is a terrible shortage. So those people that now we have to share between cybersecurity and big data, it's as you see here from that McKinsey report, we have between 140 and 190,000 people shortage by 2018. Not to mention that also we have interesting intersection of big data and cybersecurity both ways, using cybersecurity, using big data in cybersecurity or securing big data. So I would like to mention two funding opportunities at NSF that target cybersecurity education, or speaking more general, cybersecurity workforce. And for the budget purposes, both of those programs are under SaTC. If you look at the NSF budget documents, both programs are listed as SaTC. However, for the purpose of solicitation, there are two separate solicitations. So one solicitation, one program, the larger one, is called CyberCorps Scholarship for Service, or you can search the acronym SFS. And the other program is the education perspective within the SaTC solicitation. And let me start with the CyberCorps Scholarship for Service. This is the program with the budget about $45 million a year and has essentially a double-fold mission. It's a one part that is essentially the name suggests CyberCorps Scholarship for Service. So the name suggests, this is a scholarship program. It's probably more accurate description will be as a traineeship program. It's much more than a scholarship. And however, a lot of people don't read the solicitation past the title, so they don't realize that also there is a capacity track within this. And capacity track within this program is to some extent very close to what we call education perspective in SaTC program. So again, we have those twofold goals, objectives in the CyberCorps program. So one is direct intervention. About 80% of money will go to the direct intervention. That means the universities will receive a multi-million award to recruit students and award them a really, really great scholarship. And in exchange of these students agree to serve for the federal, state, local, or tribal government for as long as they receive the support. The other 20% of funds in this program go to the capacity building, and capacity building can be used for any projects that, for example, support curriculum development, outreach, faculty development, and so on and so on. Just to mention the scholarship, if anybody is interested in the scholarship component, this is a very good scholarship. The students receive, undergraduate students receive full tuition, professional development, books, all other expenses, but also on the top of this, they receive cash awards, a stipend, and that stipend for undergraduates is $20,000 a year, and for graduate students is $32,000 a year. Now, the one restriction here that is very unusual for NSF is that students have to be US citizens. In most other programs, is at least relaxed to permanent residents, but in this program has to be strictly US citizen. And let me just mention one slide about capacity building. Capacity building in this program, again, to some extent is similar. Maybe I'll comment in a second what is the major difference between education perspective in SaTC and capacity building in SFS. But let me first address a couple of myths. These are the typical questions that I receive and respond many, many times every month. So first, there is something what is called the Center of Academic Excellence in Information Assurance. That is an old 17-year-old designation by National Security Agency in the beginning, and now is National NSA/DHS. And there are about 180 institutions in this country that received the designation. that designation is not a requirement to apply either for scholarship or for capacity building. For the scholarship, it can be used as a proof that you have a mature program, but you can use alternative ways on convincing us. For capacity building is absolutely irrelevant. It's just we are, capacity building, so that will be catch-22 if you have to be designated and then build capacity. So that's myth one. The second myth is that the building capacity is not in the narrow sense. I'm thinking about applying for a large grant and build a scholarship program, but first I'll get capacity grant to build whatever I need for this. That is, again, the capacity in much wider sense. We are building capacity in the U.S. education enterprise. So think capacity in this sense. We are building capacity, but creating new curricula by transitioning current research to education, but creating a new exciting models that can be disseminated to other places, right? So capacity in this sense. Myth number 3. A lot of people think I cannot have an outreach to K-12 schools, right? That a lot of you have those ideas, we have to go a little bit lower than college to build interest in cybersecurity and computing in general. And again, there is nothing in the solicitation that says you are not allowed to do it. Maybe there is nothing that specifically encourages you to do it, but nevertheless, the K-12 can be a valid target of that support. And finally, sometimes I receive the question, can I submit that project both? So like, for example, we have a November deadline for SFS capacity building, and we have a December deadline for SaTC education. So a person that submits for capacity to SFS will not know if it's successful or not a month later, when is the deadline for a SaTC education perspective. So usually a question is, since I don't know, can I maximize my chances by submitting the same project to both in response to both solicitations? Unfortunately, according to GPG, what is a grant proposal guide, the official NSF Bible, according to that Bible, you are not allowed, essentially we can return without review a project if very similar project is submitted to another program, then both of them can be returned without review. So you are not allowed to do it. Now, looking at SaTC, so in SaTC education perspective, again, you can read a lot of details in the solicitation, but just to give you a flavor what we are funding, and I'm in the same position as Jeremy that I cannot release you 2014 this summer awards because all were done, everything is finished, but the paperwork is still going somewhere through our business units at NSF. So what I'm showing here are 2013 awards. We probably will have a similar number of 2014 awards, what is funded here. In addition to SaTC education perspective, regular deadline in December, we had, as Jeremy mentioned, in summer deadline, August 1st, the year colleague letter. And another popular question is, what is the difference? So essentially, some people say, hold on a second, we have those 3 calls for cybersecurity education proposals. We had the year colleague letter in summer. We'll have capacity building, SFS, call for November, and then SaTC education for December. What is the difference? Now, I would say, if you read carefully, then you will see there is more emphasis on the spectrum, how much you are close to foundational education research versus on the other end, how much you are doing maybe implementation, adaptation, and so on of other projects, right? If you look at that spectrum, that I will start with the Dear Colleague letter on that foundational research end, that we were looking really of projects that will be focusing and partnering ideally with educational researchers and looking of the thing out of the box idea, but nevertheless evidence-based or producing evidence in the education research area. And then we move to the middle when we have education perspective, when we maybe are not that focused on the foundational research, nevertheless, we are focused again on the evidence-based. It's not enough probably to have a pre and post survey, right, to win here. If we go to capacity building, projects in capacity will allow you also an implementation and adaptation things because of the nature of capacity building. You can ask for a proven model, add some additional elements to it, and promise us to disseminate nationally or with some successful strategies. So that will be a simplified way of distinguishing. Again, this is a spectrum, so somewhere from left to right or right to left. And just to remind you the deadlines, we have deadlines coming mid-October, mid-November, mid-December. Those three deadlines for cybersecurity education workforce-related proposals. And at this point, I think I pass it back to Jeremy for any questions that you might have. We have a few minutes left.
All the program officers come up with like 5 minutes or 3 minutes. Okay. Any questions for 3 minutes, and then we go on break, and so on. So go ahead. Do we have a mic runner?
So 2 questions about the eager proposals. Is that just between 2 individuals, or can it be 3 or 4?
Okay, which eagers? Because we talked about several different eagers.
Okay,
Do you mean the new
eager
collaborations?
The eager proposals for the new collaborations, yes.
The new collaborations have to be a minimum of 2 people, at least 1 computer scientist and at least 1 social scientist who have not worked together previously, but it can be more than 2 as long as at least 1 person on one side has not worked with at least 1 person on the other side.
Okay, so I'm a behavioral researcher who finds myself in a very technical department. Can those 2 individuals be from the same department at the same academic institution?
Yes, you would need to argue strongly why they really are from different areas. For example, if they're both in the I school, that would be an example where, because I schools tend to be interdisciplinary.
Okay.
And at the break, would one of the AV guys come up here? It's complaining it's out of power. Okay. Other questions? Okay, why don't we if there's no other questions, why don't we take a coffee break?